Hi, I'm Jen Peters. Thank you so much for joining me. In this video, we're going to look at several points to consider when you're looking to or have recently left a narcissistic relationship and you have children together. So firstly, I want to really, truly honor you for getting to this point, because it's actually extremely difficult to get to the point where you are actually ready to leave or do leave. The reason for that is that there's usually so much trauma bonding, actually bonding us to the relationship. It's very difficult to step out. So well done. And I love that you're doing this also, because for your children, it's going to make such a difference to them. So a couple of points. So one of the first things is we want to start looking at having modified contact, which means that you really only interact with the person, your ex-partner, about matters concerning the children or potentially the actual separation, as in like the details around who gets what and that kind of thing. Because if you start venturing into other topics, you're going to really open yourself up to a whole lot of other chaos that you don't really need to be involved in. Okay, so the other thing is that when it comes to narcissistic relationships and separations, how we are with them and how we handle and approach different things will either soften the narcissist or it will inflame them. And I know firsthand how damn tempting it is to go on there guns blazing. And it's well and truly understandable and justified a lot of the time too. But the truth is that most of the time when we go on guns blazing, we're often going to end up making it more difficult for ourselves. Now, you know the person that's involved, so you will know best which approach is going to get the outcome you need better. So having said that, in an ideal world, if we can try and work alongside them as best as we can rather than against them, the name of the game is trying to make your life better, right? Because if you're less traumatized and not being derailed and pulled into these side arguments going on, it's going to allow you to be a better parent for your kids. So one of the things I would suggest, now again, it depends on your personal circumstances, and in some cases it's just not possible, and that is okay. But in an ideal world, you want to make sure that you are financially set up before you go, if you can. Either you've got a job, you've got financial backing, or you've got support from somebody else. Having said that, I know that it's not always possible. And also, of course, if you or the children are actually unsafe in the environment, then you might not have the luxury of time getting that stuff sorted out, right? If you are unsafe, just know that depending on what country you're actually in, there are often agencies, government agencies, that are there to actually support you in these types of situations. Okay, now in terms of the getting set up and getting ready to leave, I have found through working with so many people in this space that it's usually better if you don't announce what you're doing until you're about to go, okay? Because oftentimes they will try to derail you somehow. So you don't want to have to battle them as well. And I know how tempting it is to throw it back at them and say, well, I'm going anyway, or whatever it is that you want to say. But it can just make it more difficult for you. And again, you're wanting to be choosing a path that makes it easier for you and the kids, okay? And often that's going to be a different direction to what you want to do. So once that separation has occurred, you want to start looking at putting really firm boundaries in around your home, around phone calls and accessibility. Okay, now often, especially if we're staying in the family home and they're leaving, they will come and go as they please. Okay, now it's actually okay to say no. It is okay to put that boundary in. Just because it was their old house and also their children are there doesn't mean that they can come and go as they damn well please. All right, so you're going to need to be really strong and put these boundaries in to create a safe and sacred space for you and your children. Otherwise, you're going to be on high alert and you're going to continue that trauma. Even though you're no longer together, you might as well be, because that trauma is still, being regularly activated. Okay, so you can put boundaries around your home. If needed, you may even have to go as far as to change your locks. You can also put boundaries around phone calls. For example, it might be that you've agreed that, that they can call the kids, if the kids are going to be with you, for example, or most of the time, you might want to put in place that they can speak to the kids maybe on a Sunday and a Wednesday between 4 and 6 p.m., or a time that actually is doable for the other person and is reasonable for the kids. Okay, and I know it's tempting to kind of say that's it, you're not having any access to the kids, but obviously that's not always possible either, and it might not always be quite right either. Again, you're going to need to use your discernment there. If needed, you may need to actually go as far as to block the number outside of those particular times, so that you don't have to be on high alert every time you hear your phone go off thinking, oh my God, is that them? Okay. So now sort out the childcare arrangements really as soon as possible, because that's usually leveraged to a lot of arguing and a lot of power play, around each other. So even if it means that you look at drawing up a temporary type agreement, so it might be just for the next 3 or 4 months, and get them to agree to that, and then you can extend it out and modify it as needed. Because the truth is that earlier on, you might feel like that's it, I don't want them to see the kids at all. And again, depending on whether the kids are safe or not, that may be the way that you need to go. But the truth is, solo parenting is bloody hard, so you actually might want and need a wee bit of a break. But again, it depends on the nature of that person and whether your children are actually safe there or not. Now, something that I have personally found and also seen through my practice is that when it comes to the kids, if we make choices that are child-centered, so you stop and ask yourself, what is best for our children, then usually the answer and direction is pretty clear. Whereas when we're trying to work it out between two very hurt people, then that's when you end up, flip-flopping, and there's a lot of power struggle that goes on between the two. So come back to the children. What's best for the children? Like, what's really, truly best for the children? Because most of the times it's going to be seeing both parents to some degree. Righty ho. And once you've got that sorted, it just takes a massive cause of arguments off the table. Now, when it comes to communicating with them, I would get very clear before you actually initiate a phone call. Get clear on what you want to discuss. So there might be 3 points you want to discuss. Get really clear on what those 3 points are, potentially what outcomes you're actually looking for before you even make the call. Okay. Now, if they try to pull you off those topics, come back to those 3 topics or however many topics there is on your list, and try not to deviate, because when we start going off those topics, that's when we'll usually ending up in some kind of argument and bust up. And that can be really derailing, especially in the first little while after separating. Now, when you're in a conversation with them, whether it be a phone call or a text conversation or a drop off or a pickup, if the other person, if you're feeling triggered, that's your signal that you need to step away from that interaction. You need to and if they're being abusive in any kind of way, then you need to actually say to them, if you're going to speak to me like that, I'm going to terminate the call, or whatever it may be for you. So that triggering is when you want to step away from the conversation. okay? And if needed, and you will probably need to do this a few times, you'll probably need to hang up a few times. They'll soon get the picture that if they want to speak to you, then they need to speak to you in a respectful way, okay? And just know that even if you're in the family home and they have come around for whatever reason, it is okay for you to tell them to leave. It's okay for you to ask them to leave. Even though it was their family home as well, it's not anymore. Okay, so adjusting to those new parameters can be a little bit interesting for a wee while. Now, one other thing, as I'd mentioned, is only engage with them about topics that are relating to the children and separation or are absolutely necessary, okay? Because otherwise you're going to end up getting into some kind of scuffle, most likely. Now, last thing, when you get settled, when you get your feet on the ground, my suggestion is, or invitation is, to engage a therapist who is skilled in narcissistic abuse recovery and who has, number one, experienced it themselves, but equally as important, has actually healed from narcissistic abuse. Because if you're working with somebody who is still very hot under the collar about it, still gets triggered, still gets upset by it, still actually is hating narcissists, you'll find that they're not actually healed. And so whilst it's comforting to know that they're on the same page as you, it's not going to actually help you heal. And ultimately, we want you to heal. We want to dissolve that trauma, because otherwise you're not going to be able to parent in the way that you probably want to parent when you're feeling really traumatized all the time. And also your children, they need a parent. If they've got one parent who's narcissistic, they need another parent who is calm, who is solid, who feels secure and safe to them. They don't need a parent who is bitter and twisted and angry and resentful, even though it's 100% understandable. It totally is. I was like that for probably about 2 years, to be honest. So it's totally understandable, but it's not helpful for the kids. It's not helpful for them at all. So the sooner we can dissolve that trauma that you're carrying, the better it is for you and for them. And the thing is too, when that trauma is dissolved, you will find that the narcissist is not actually able to trigger you anymore. So they then lose their power over you. Whereas if you haven't done your deep inner work, they're going to be able to trigger you left, right, and center, and derail you at will. And we don't want that anymore. Okay, so there's lots of free content online. I also have a Dissolving Codependency Course, which is very specific to those who have been narcissistically abused, because the truth is that when we've been in a longer term, as in, or even actually more than a month or two, to be quite frank, relationship with a narcissist or someone who's narcissistic, we do have codependent patterning. That's why we got into the relationship, and that's why we've found it so hard to get out. Okay, so I would invite you to look to dissolving your codependent type patterning, the people pleasing, the fixing, the caretaking, the no boundaries, the not speaking up, all of those kinds of things, because that's what got you into that relationship in the first place. So we want to dissolve those patterns and wounds so that you don't carry them forward, and most importantly, so that your kids have a really solid anchor as a parent who's not being triggered left, right, and center. Okay, my loves, look, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'm really keen to know what it is specifically that you struggle the most with as you're leaving, or in the stage that you're in, because I can then create more content to actually better serve you. Okay, my loves, once again, I have so much honor for you, for the stage that you're in, what you've been through, but I want you to know that healing, and healing fully, is possible for you, and life can improve infinitely and in the most magnificent ways. Okay, where you are now is probably the worst it's going to get. It's just going to get better from here if you do your inner work. Okay, my loves, all the very best. Mwah.